This is Burpham, a quiet village tucked into the edge of the South Downs, a few miles northeast of Arundel. At one time, the village was closely linked to the river, but as we'll see from these postcards, all that changed more than 100 years ago. Burpham took its name from the Burh, a Saxon fort built around 900 AD to resist Viking ingress up the River Arun from the coast. Since those times, the river at Burpham has changed dramatically. As recently as the mid-19th century, it was a wide, open and attractive stretch of the Arun, providing a transportation link with the outside world. Now, trees and dense foliage make it hard to see the river at all. This postcard from around 1900 shows the river being used for pleasure. At the top of the slope was Cliff Cottage, renowned for its teas by visiting boaters and run by Dora and Walter Wakeham for many years. The cottage occasionally appears as the sender's address on postcards, so the Wakehams must have taken in relatives or lodgers. This card mentions going out in the boat, so perhaps Dora and Walter made their boat available to guests. This is where the old wharf was located, and there was a ferry across from the other bank. Today, especially at low water, it's little more than a muddy ditch, and it's hard to imagine that barges would have delivered fuel to the village and taken away farm produce to Arundel or Littlehampton. The river was important to the village because road access was not easy. How times have changed. This early photo shows what could be the ferryman, complete with whiskers, bowler hat and pipe, proudly posing for the camera. Just upstream from here is a little place called Peppering, and that's where I'm off to now. Back in the early 1900s, Peppering was a picturesque riverside hamlet. This card shows a few workers' cottages and the old malt house. This building became known as Tansy's Cottage, after an appearance in the 1921 silent movie Tansy, based on the novel by Tickner Edwards. Directed by Cecil Hepworth, Tansy tells the story of a young shepherdess, played by Alma Taylor, and was filmed largely on the Sussex Downs. This is all that's left of the old malt house, and over there is the site of Tansy's Cottage, but you'd scarcely know that now. This card from around 1903 shows the old malt house almost completely covered by ivy. Interestingly, when posted in 1905, George the sender forgot to put a stamp on it, which cost Miss P. Weldon a whole penny for the payment due on delivery. Both Tansy's Cottage and the old malt house survived until at least the 1960s, as featured on this postcard from that time. Other postcards from earlier reveal just how different the river and life around Burpham used to be. Camping on the bank was popular then, and on this card, X marks the spot where the sender was having a splendid time, although his pal, presumably a dog, takes a lot of keeping in order and has put his foot in the butter. This card shows another tent by the river, along with a pile of osiers and someone arriving in a rowing boat. A major event in the local farming calendar was the annual sheep wash, which made use of the shallow edges of the river at Burpham. This card shows the shepherds standing in barrels to keep themselves dry as they guided the sheep through the water. The sheep wash also featured in the film Tansy. Sometimes postcards pose mysteries. Why would the sender of this one add a bridge when there clearly isn't one? On the back of the card, addressed to a Miss A. Young, the sender wrote, "Dear A, I have marked where our bridge is being put. Ta-ta, Alf." Well, after wading through old newspaper archives, we found the answer. It was the site of a temporary pontoon constructed during an army training camp in 1905. Alf was probably a soldier in the West Kent Regiment, here on manoeuvres around the South Downs, a regular occurrence at that time. Nowadays, the river here is only navigable by small boats. We're lucky enough to be here right on high tide, so I'm going to give it a go. The west bank along this stretch of the river is now completely overgrown, with no clearings. But once past the overhanging trees and bushes, it's plain sailing for a small boat like mine. So why did the river at Burpham fall into such decline? Well, the answer's quite simple. The railway came in 1863, bringing with it two new bridges, severing the meandering river in two places, north and south of Burpham. To avoid the extra cost and complexity of building two lifting bridges, a new course was cut to the west of the railway, diverting river traffic and the river itself away from Burpham. The now redundant stretch of the Arun became known as the Burpham Loop, serving no purpose except for recreational boating trips. Today, the loop is rarely used and may well be unnavigable to all boats in a few years' time. Right now, though, I'm heading for the pub. One consequence of the new railway was increased river traffic to places like this one. The Black Rabbit pub has been popular since the 1900s, when motorboats such as the Nancy Lee, the Lady Nancy and the Britannia would have brought passengers from Littlehampton for a day out on the river. And one of these old launches is still here, half buried in a field opposite the pub. Stranded like a beached whale, here lies Britannia. A sad end to a craft which in the last century probably carried hundreds of thousands of passengers up the river. The postcards I've collected not only give us a key to the river's recent history, but they help to unlock some of its secrets.